As a Gen Z teenager, I've always been a big fan of online video games, and my personal favorite is Fortnite. So whenever I get the chance to play it, I treasure every second of the experience. However, recently, I have been getting some of the worst FPS spikes I've ever seen. And on top of that, they are awfully consistent. And I mean literally. In fact, in some games, my FPS almost looks like a heartbeat monitor. And you can imagine how annoying this would be in FPS shooters where literally every second counts. And so my quest began to fix my gaming PC. Before starting my 7-day trial, I wanted to make sure it wasn't something obvious or something simple, because then at that point, it wouldn't make sense for me to create a YouTube video on it. So I started by stress testing my computer in multiple programs like Cinebench, Furmark, OCCT, and TimeSpy. However, none of these tools really helped. And according to them, my computer was in perfect condition. Or maybe I just don't know how to use the programs properly. I mean, just take a look at this. Ain't no way, bro. What is this? From here, I tested different games other than Fortnite because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't something with the game itself. And so I started off with Marvel Rivals, and to my surprise, this game actually ran perfectly, all high graphics, all high intensity, and without any type of stuttering at all. On the other hand, once I got to Valorant, there were stutters like so bad that I literally exited the game and the stutters was literally like this. Okay, maybe it stopped this time, but oh no, there it is. Consistent and on beat as the FPS frame drops from the game, which was weird. Now, usually when you have graphics problems, it usually has something to do with the graphics card. Duh. So knowing this, I swapped out the RX 6900 XT from my PC. However, I still got the same stutters. And so at this point, I knew I had an interesting journey ahead of me, and so I decided to record it. And so day one began, and I started by swapping out the SSD, and here was the plan for that. So I have this 4TB SSD, and I'm gonna put it in here, run Windows externally, because I have a theory that it has something to do with drivers or some change that I've done to Windows or some software thing. So if I install Windows onto here, I run it over here, install the drivers that I can, and if it runs perfectly, then I know it's nothing with the hardware and more of something with the hardware. So that's what I'm gonna be doing right now. Wish me luck. And so I swapped out my drive and I installed a fresh install of Windows 11. And while I was at it, I also updated BIOS to the latest version. And of course, this video wouldn't have been so long if we found the issue here. So we failed. And so I continued and I tried looking for some obvious things I might have missed, maybe something simple. So the first thing that came to mind was, what if it's the display port? However, once I tested it out, I failed. I then tested a different monitor and failed. Next, I tested a lot of different kits of RAM and failed. Next, I tried to power the graphics card with a single cable in case there was a problem with one of the cables coming from the power supply, but failed. So from here, troubleshooting wouldn't be as easy as pulling out a cable, and I couldn't rely on the cookie cutter TikTok troubleshooting playbook.
Enable XMP.
Right.
Try different RAM sticks.
Right.
And enable RGB for more FPS.
What?
What?
To give you an idea, I started by swapping the graphics card again. However, this time I'm going to use a NVIDIA GPU instead of the AMD ones that I've used previously. To be specific, I had to pull out the monster, power hungry, the destroying GTX 1050, non-TI by the way. And of course it failed, it is what it is. But as I was swapping it, I remembered that my RX 6900 XT had this little nick on it. However, this has never really impacted performance, but I just thought I'd bring it up. So I didn't think nothing of it. I then tested my computer with a different power supply and failed. There it is. What I do notice, I don't know if you guys can tell from the sound, the CPU ramps up as soon as this is about to glitch out. So we can confirm it's not a power supply. It's either the motherboard, CPU, or something around here, the monitor. So that's gonna be the next theory to test out. It's gonna be this on a 1080p monitor and see what happens. From here, I tried using the integrated graphics coming from the CPU to run the games, and I still got the same stuttering issue, which was weird because if it was something with the graphics card or something, I don't think it would translate. And so with these tests, I was pretty sure it had to be either the motherboard or the CPU, or so that's what I thought. Because in the same day, I managed to swap out both of the parts. As you guys can see, I got them all pretty much uncovered. So now it would really just be swapping one CPU onto the other. So let's give it a shot. And by the end of the day, I was happy to report that I had finally done it, but I had to keep quiet because it was a bit late. Bro, it's finally happening, bro. This should work. It's nighttime though, I can't talk too loud. Imagine it just crashes right here. I think we're good. And that was when day 2 hit me like a hammer. So because I thought I fixed my computer, I actually put it back into the setup right here. But when I got everything set up and connected into my monitors and played Valorant, the issue was literally back. And I was so annoyed at this point. Like it was just, I'm lost for words even right now. So I had to take a brief break to think about what I should try next because I pretty much isolated every variable as far as software, hardware. Then it occurred to me that what if it's actually the power in my house? Like that's just a crazy theory, right? But I actually pulled out my Anker Solix C100, which is like a power station, and then I literally hooked it up right here. And I ran it, but same issue. So at that point I was like, it was not the power, and it wasn't likely anyways, but I was running out of solutions, as you can tell. So from here, I had to rely on a very trusted friend that I talked to almost every day in my life at this point, and I had to pull him out. I asked him a couple of really deep questions. And so I had a conversation with my friend Bernard, or in other words, ChatGPT. As far as the conversation went, I basically just asked for help and basically did everything it told me to do.
To fix your computer, grab a gallon of milk and P. Diddy's baby oil to get the transistors excited.
What the? Okay, maybe not everything, but as far as software advice like Windows changes, BIOS changes, I basically followed it to the T as much as I could, but no, still failed. And none of it worked. So I said, fuck AI, and I started using my brain again.
Sorry. No, you straight, you straight. Man, I'm sorry. Yo.
So I'd already messed around with the hardware parts. I've tried doing a fresh install of Windows. So how can we get more insight on the problem? So I thought to myself, what if I pull out a computer with the same exact specs and then I test it out in the video games I'm having stutters with to see if it's not something to do with software. If I still see the issues there, then I can somewhat confidently say that there's probably something wrong with the software side. And you might be wondering, did he really go out to buy a computer with the same exact parts? No, I actually flip computers in my city, and I have a cool series right here if you'd like to check it out. And because of that, I managed to have a computer with really similar specs. It had a Ryzen 5 9600X and an RX 7800 XT that I actually tested in the beginning of the episode. And so I got to testing, and what do we see? Well, we see a smooth gaming experience. So at this point, I could confirm that there was something wrong with the hardware side, maybe? As you can tell, testing this rig did not help at all, and honestly left me more lost than I was in the beginning. Luckily, my brain pulled through again and I managed to pull out another test I can try. And here is what I came up with. So with all the times I tested my computer out and was having issues, I was actually testing my computer inside the case. So I was like, what if there's a short with the case or something up with it, you know? And for context, a short usually happens when there's like a cable that's spliced up right, or your case is not grounded properly, something along those lines that's causing your motherboard or something to not start up right or something, or work properly, you know? And usually when the case isn't grounded right, you could usually touch it and you'll get like static energy charge or something. Cause I've had some weird situations. Like I could touch the outside of the case, like the metal part, it would turn on. I'm not even touching the power button and it will turn on. That's how weird it can get with these shorts, but I didn't really solve anything with this. So it doesn't really make too much sense because before it was running fine for the longest time and it would have had to have some serious impact for some type of short to even happen in the first place. But nevertheless, we gave it a shot. And if this theory held true, the white motherboard that was originally in my computer before I swapped it for the Gigabyte motherboard, which was placed in after I swapped it out, should work outside of the case, right? So I pulled out the old motherboard that was in my computer, put it on the cardboard box that the Gigabyte motherboard came with, and then I basically installed the CPU, a cooler, a graphics card, and installed Windows again because it's a whole different motherboard with different drivers and all that. And lo and behold, it didn't work. Didn't work again. Didn't work. All right, I really didn't want to do this, but it looks like we had to pull out the trump card. Here it is. Yes, sir. You already know what it is. And it's just another graphics card, but it's gonna be easier for me to just swap that into here because it has the AMD drivers. And if that works, there's something wrong with this bad boy. And that's just about it. I don't really know what else to do. If, you know, I keep coming up with shit to try out, so we'll see. And guess what? My secret weapon did not work. However, this was odd. I mean, we have a brand new card here. Yeah, we're still facing issues with the graphics. I mean, still weird. At the same time, we've already tested 2 cards, so not too weird, you know? But just to confirm there wasn't actually something wrong with the video card, I ran the 9070 XT on a completely different system with an i9 13900K, and it worked perfectly. Of course, this was yet another test that was kind of useless in my opinion. I don't know why I did this, but as you can see, I'm slowly kind of going insane here. And the next test I ran was actually a little bit crazy as well. However, it did have some logic. So when I first had my computer, I had a 2TB SSD, and then I swapped it out for a 4TB one. And I installed all the Windows, the drivers, and basically it still gave me the stuttering. So what my thought process was what if this 4TB SSD had an issue of some kind? And my personal drive was actually great. It's just I had some software from using Windows over a long time or some tweaks, because I like to watch like videos to optimize your FPS games and all that. So I dabbled in that, so I'm honestly never sure if I ever mess something up. So I decided to reinstall my 2TB, reset it. However, this didn't do anything for me and also did not work. It is officially day 3 of this troubleshooting journey. Cue up the music, man. Cue up the music. Alright, so I literally cannot lose today and I must solve this issue because I need to get back to work. Alright, so besides being exhausted from that skit, we actually need to talk about what I did yesterday. And this is the only theory I've come up with. So I've had this 6900 XT from the start, and as I've shown, it has a little nick at the bottom of the PCIe. And then my theory is that whichever motherboard that graphics card touches will now continue to have issues with graphics, regardless if there's a graphics card installed or not. So that is why the 2 motherboards that I have, the brand new one that I installed into my computer and the old motherboard that used to be in there, are giving me issues now. Now, obviously, the only way I would be able to test this theory is to use that graphics card on another computer. However, let's say it is true, then I would be down another motherboard. So instead, I'm just going to rebuild another quote-unquote computer with the same parts, however, different motherboard, and test out the 9070 XT that I know didn't work on the computer back here that I assembled and was giving me issues. So that is what the plan is for today. And so hopefully figure this out, because I'm not trying to do a round 4. Round 3 has to be it. Come on, we gotta finish it now. We gotta finish it now. And with this insane theory, I decided to swap the motherboard on my computer yet again. However, before I did that, I wanted to do some testing, because if this theory was true that my motherboard was damaged whenever I used that RX 6900 XT, that would theoretically mean that some other parts in my computer would be damaged, right? So what I decided to do was use the 9600X that I had from that computer and place it onto the original one it came from to see if the CPU would give me any errors or any faulty signs. And thankfully, no, there wasn't no signs. So if my theory was correct, then the CPU wasn't damaged, which is kind of a good thing, but I don't know. All right, so we have officially made it to endgame. We have the computer assembled, I already updated BIOS. So let's see what happens. Bro, come on, bro. I'm not doing this. At this point, if this doesn't work, I'm just not stoned. All right, see what happens. Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay, man. Brand new motherboard, bro. Brand new fucking motherboard, bro. At this point, I had dedicated 3 full days to trying to fix the issue. And so I decided to take a step back and think about what I should try next. And so throughout the next 4 days, I didn't do much and I tried little things here and there. For example, I tried a new memory testing program called MemTest86. I went through a bunch of subreddits and couldn't find much. I swapped out the SSD yet again. However, this time it was a brand new SSD. And some other random things, to be honest. However, on day 6, boredom would lead me to one of the biggest hints of the series so far. You see, I was extremely bored on this day, and so I decided to hop on Valorant. And whenever I want to play Valorant, I usually play a match of deathmatch, which basically is just FPS shooting and tracking, and it helps warm up my aim. And while playing this, the gameplay actually felt pretty smooth, but I did notice like micro stutters, and they were awfully consistent, like to the point where it was like 5 seconds, cut, 5 seconds, cut, which was weird because it was exactly or very similar to the frequency that I encountered in my own PC. So then I was suspicious. However, just to confirm this was true, I hopped onto the gun range and I went to see if this was repeatable. And when I pulled out the FPS graph, I was surprised because it would literally be those same consistent cuts. There's another spike, bro. What? This is a whole different computer. This let me know that this might be an issue with the game itself because there was no way a system with a 9600X and an RX 9070 XT, which was the same one that was brand new out of the box, would struggle with a game like this. Not to mention, FPS spikes in game are usually like random and not consistent at all. For example, you can expect FPS spikes when you're shooting at somebody or fighting someone in game, when you're moving across a map really quickly, or anything that makes your computer suddenly run more demanding things. However, similar to my other experience in testing on my own personal computer, the gun range, first of all, is a fairly small map. 2, I'm not fighting anybody and I'm playing against robots. 3, I'm not even shooting the robots, I'm not even moving around too much, and yet I'm still seeing these spikes. So with this in mind, I dove deeper and I even went into a software I never even used, and it was AMD's stress test in the actual software. And the AMD stress testing software basically lets you know about the temperature, the actual GPU clock, and other simple metrics. So I easily monitored my own graphics card when I was testing. And here's what I saw. What I noticed was that the RX 6900 XT would have sudden spikes on the power consumption in the GPU clock, and they were like on point. Like if one metric dropped like a severe curve, like the other power consumption would also drop that far down. Another thing that I also noticed with my own personal graphics card was that the temperature was a bit high. On the stress test, I think I saw my card peak at like 80 degrees or so, which isn't good, isn't bad, because people even report up to 90 degrees, which is, I don't know, that's pretty insane. Not to mention, my card was only pulling 255 watts, which was also a bit weird because these cards are rated up to 300 watts. And I checked out benchmarking videos of somebody else using the exact same software, and they were easily pulling over the 300 watt limit. Now sure, these people use different cards, and different cards usually have different speeds and this and that. However, it should still hover at that 300 watt level, because that is what it is rated at. And with the AMD software, you could actually overclock it on the spot, so this was really cool. And what I ended up doing was unlocking the power limit slider all the way to the end, and this meant that it would unlock the power limit and should supposedly pull 300 watts or even more if it worked properly. However, once I ran the test with this unlocked power limit, the graphics card literally just gave up on the benchmark, and it would literally perform like this, and then all of a sudden, boom. At this point, I was pretty convinced that there was something going on with my personal card. However, I never use the software and have no idea how accurate or what it actually does. And so what I decided to do was pull out a different rig with literally the exact same specs. No, it wasn't the one that I used before, the white build that I was using then. It was actually a whole different build. It had a 9600X and it had an RX 6900 XT. So it was the exact same card. And when I ran it through the software, it actually worked pretty well. I mean, with the default settings, nothing changed on the AMD overclocking thing. I was able to pull over that 300 watt limit multiple times throughout the benchmark. And not to mention, remember those spikes that I said earlier, like when the power consumption would drop, the GPU clock would also drop? Well, with this card, I think the power consumption did drop. However, the GPU clock dropped a little bit. So as compared to the other card that when the power consumption would drop down like this, GPU clock would also drop down that low. However, with the new card, the power consumption might drop down like this. However, the GPU clock had a small dip. On top of all of this, the card actually ran a lot cooler as well. I think it was like around 70 degrees. And so looking at this information, I decided to just get my card and repaste it, install some new thermal pads in places that it was a bit dry. And then finally, I got to testing it. I was excited because this might be the fix I was looking for throughout the whole video. However, when I tested it, things just got even weirder, because on stock, default limits where previously would run perfectly with those weird spikes, it now would run like 40 seconds with default settings, no overclocking whatsoever, and it would still crash and give up after like 40 seconds or so. And so at this point, I could confirm that there was something wrong with my precious card, man. No. Luckily, around the time that I swapped thermal paste and the pads for my RX 6900 XT, I actually did the same thing for an RTX 3090, and I brought it back to life. But when I installed the card, I actually still got the same exact spikes. But remember, these random spikes will show up on a computer that is perfectly working and stable. So what exactly was the next move on the chessboard? You see, I had already reached out to communities on Reddit without no response. I reached out to my local Facebook groups with no response. So my last option was to actually contact Epic Games Support or Riot Games Support and see if the developers can somehow help out or the support system there. And that was when I struck gold. You see, I launched up OBS in hopes of recording the actual stutters in game, and I started with Fortnite. But when I pressed record, I noticed that the frames were oddly smooth. I thought it might have been temporary, but after spending around 10 to 20 minutes on it, it wasn't. Then I suddenly remembered this post I saw on Reddit a while back. There was a user that claimed that he was having FPS drops constantly and he couldn't find a way to get rid of them. However, one day he decided to record them, and miraculously it started working again. After finding that recording the actual gameplay in Valorant fixes actual stuttering, he then decided to do something different and higher the clock speeds on his graphics card. And with these changes, he actually managed to get a stable experience whenever he's running the game. And so I decided to try his solution and went into MSI Afterburner and set the manual clock speeds when playing Fortnite. However, as many tweaks as I did in game, none of it ended up working. On top of that, MSI Afterburner actually has a lot of features to monitor things like your temperatures, GPU voltages, and a lot of different things that I have no clue about. And so I decided to log the actual graphs when I was playing games before recording and after. And I did find some weird things. However, I couldn't really do much with this information and didn't really help. And as of right now, I still don't understand why these stutters happen and why they disappear when I start recording my gameplay. But at least we can finally enjoy the game once again. And just a reminder, I'll still destroy you in Fortnite.